Good morning. My name is Michael Soyfer. My last name is spelled S-O-Y-F-E-R. I'm joined here today by my colleague, Jared McLean. We're attorneys with the Institute for Justice, a national nonprofit law firm that brings lawsuits across the country to protect Americans' constitutional rights. This lawsuit is part of the Institute for Justice's project on immunity and accountability, which seeks to hold government officials accountable when they violate the Constitution. It also involves two of the Institute for Justice's key issue areas: the First Amendment's protection for free speech and the Fourth Amendment's prohibition against unreasonable searches and seizures. Ruth Herbel retired from a long career in public service and decided to continue serving her community in her 70s as a city councilwoman. For her tireless efforts to stamp out corruption and mismanagement in city government, she was forced to endure an illegal and retaliatory search of her home. Ruth and the Institute for Justice have partnered to bring this lawsuit to send a message to Mayor Mayfield, Chief Cody, all of their co-conspirators, and government officials across the country who would use investigations to silence political opposition. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jared McLean.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jared McLean. That's J-A-R-E-D-M-C-C-L-A-I-N. We're here today because our client, Ruth Herbel, has filed a federal lawsuit against the city and county of Marion and several officials who engaged in a conspiracy to deprive her and her husband Ronald of their civil rights. Ruth was a member of the Marion City Council when the mayor's allies searched her home, took her only phone and her computer to punish her for her political speech. While Ruth was on city council, she was frequently outspoken against the mayor and his allies. She fought for honesty and transparency in government, and that upset the people in power. Mayor Mayfield tried repeatedly to silence Ruth while she was in office, and eventually he decided that the only way to do so was to have her arrested and removed from office. So he had some of his buddies draw up a bogus warrant to search Ruth's home along with the Marion County Record's offices and the home of the Record's publisher. There was no real investigation, there was no evidence, there were no crimes. It was just pretext for punishment. The First Amendment ensures that people can participate in government without fear of retribution. The Marion officials violated that right when they used the force of law to punish Ruth for her political speech. They also violated the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. They didn't have probable cause to support these searches, so they relied on false statements instead. Any reasonable police officer who looked at these warrants would have known that they were invalid, but they went forward with the search anyway. The only thing that kept Ruth out of jail was the national outrage in response to this illegal conspiracy. And Ruth is here today now to demand justice. And I'll turn it over to Ruth to share her remarks.
Thank you, Jared. I'm Ruth Herbel. Herbel is spelled H-E-R-B-E-L. I would like to share with you a little bit of my background. I moved to Marion when I was 18 years old, and I have always considered Marion my home. I worked for the Kansas Department of Transportation for 4 years, where I met my husband and we was married in 1962. I took a break from working to raise our 3 children. When the youngest one started school, I went back to work for federal crop insurance. And later I went to work for United States Department of Agriculture, the ASES, and was there for 22 years before I retired. I decided to run for council in 2019. I was very dissatisfied with where the city was heading. We were going backwards instead of forward. And I was tired of hearing all the dishonesty from the city administrator. I have followed the city over the past 20 years. and watched as they neglected the laws and catered to the good old boys. When Mayor Mayfield was elected to mayor, it was with hopes that he would act on the city administration that was telling all the lies. But that didn't happen. And when I opposed him and didn't rubber stamp everything, that's when he got upset and tried to oust me from council. The first attempt occurred when he asked us to sign a personnel statement, which just simply said that we were at-will employees. City council members are not at-will employees, but elected officials. In July, an amendment was passed, or an ordinance, was passed that Mayor Mayfield supported. And I campaigned against this ordinance. And in December 2022, it was brought to a referendum. And the voters rejected this ordinance by a 10-to-1 vote. There again, he retaliated against me. In January of 2023, Mayor Mayfield, his wife, and the city superintendent of electricity started a petition, along with 3 others, started a petition to oust me from council. This effort failed due to lack of signatures. Then August the 11th came, and where the raid happened at my home. This was a very traumatic day for my husband, as he has dementia. And it was traumatic for me too, but not as bad as it was Ron. Ron went into shock for about 4 months, and we really didn't know if he was going to live or die. And luckily he is living, but he has lasting effects after that raid. And I am honored that the Institute for Justice has stepped up and accepted my case and will represent me in this lawsuit. For that, I'm very thankful. I hope this sends a message to the law enforcement community that if they violate the First and Second Amendment, then they need to be held accountable. Remember, this could happen to you, and for that, I'm thankful for Institute for Justice protecting our rights. Thank you.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions about the lawsuit or fact-specific stuff for Ruth, we would be happy to take them now.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Cheyenne.
It's talking to the mics. Very noisy out here. I wonder if you could just take us back to that day, to the day of the raid, and tell us what happened at your house. It's been pretty widely reported what happened at other people's houses.
Okay, the day of the raid, the sheriff's officer appeared at my door to serve the warrant. My husband answered the door, and he has dementia, and I was unavailable. And so he went through the house hollering either Honey or Ruth, looking for me. And when I caught up with him, he was really upset. It's not very often that we see a police officer at our door. And so I set him down and calmed him down a little bit, and went to the door and talked to the officer, and he said, "I have a warrant to serve for you." And he gave me the warrant, and I read the warrant and invited him in. And he said, "I need to confiscate your phone and your computer. Where are they?" And I said, "Well, my computer's on my desk and my phone's right here." So he took my phone and placed it on top of my computer. And we waited for probably a half hour, and then he called another officer and said, "I think Ruth is ready to talk." So after that, the chief of police, Gideon Cody, came and appeared at my door. And he didn't knock, he just walked in like he owned the place and said, "I'm here to talk about the identity theft. Do you have some place that we can sit?" And I said, "Yeah." So we went to the kitchen table, or the dining room table, to visit. And we sat there, and he said, "You know that you've committed a crime with your phone." And I said, "No." I said, "You do not know I've committed a crime." And we talked about it, and he read me my Miranda rights, and I was very open with him. I had told the city administrator everything I knew, where I got the screenshot of the KDOR letter and everything. So there was no reason for him to come to my house, but he did. So we sat and visited for about a half hour, and I told him, I said, you can't take my phone. I said, that's the only phone I have, and I said, I need it in case I have to have an ambulance for my husband. And he says, well, you committed a crime, I have to have it. So anyway, he took my phone and my computer, or
Sorry,
another officer
Didn't hear
did.
that part of the traffic. He said what?
He said, I have to take your phone and your computer. And I asked him at that time, could I at least get the numbers off of my phone for the medical numbers and my children. I didn't have these numbers anywhere else. I do now. That taught me a lesson. But anyway, he gave the phone to the other officer, and he stayed with the phone and the computer until another officer came up to pick it up. And when the other officer, who is the acting chief of police now, came and was going to bag my phone and the computer, I asked him also, I said, can I get the numbers from my phone? And Zach Hudlin told me no. He said, you'll just have to go get another phone. And I said, Zach, you can't take my phone. I said, I have no other phone. He said, well, go buy another one. It's like they grow on trees. But I did. I went to McPherson and bought another phone. They bagged my equipment and left at that point.
So with the phone and the forensics examiner you hired and other expenses.
No.
What would you say that?
We did not hire
I
the
thought-
forensic examiner. When the county attorney issued a statement that the equipment should be released, Marion County Record hired a forensic. And he came down to pick up the equipment at the sheriff's office. And the sheriff released my equipment with the Marion County Record. And it took me a while to figure out where my equipment was. But yes, it did cost over $3,000 to get my phone and my computer back.
What was
What
the
were the thoughts going on through your head when like all of that was happening? I mean, confusion, fear.
Well, I was totally stressed and probably didn't get everything that happened that day. But yeah, there was a lot of fear in it. I've never seen a police officer at my door before. And it was a total shock to me and my husband. So,
You said that it had lasting effects on him.
yes.
Could you elaborate on that?
It had lasting effects on him, and he's still very confused at times, and we are still working with our specialist down here at Wichita to get his meds adjusted. We brought him down to the specialist, and the specialist ran all kinds of tests on him, and including a brain scan, and gave him some new medicine, and we thought that was working, but we constantly have to keep adjusting that medicine.
And there's been several other lawsuits that have been brought forward by other people. Did that kind of help give you the courage to step forward, or were you already planning on doing this?
I was going to step forward because I think the people that did this need to be held accountable.
So, as an observer of this, what I see is kind of different about your lawsuit is you're laying out a case here that the real driving force behind this is Mayor David Mayfield. Whereas I think some of the early reportings focus more on Chief Cody's role. Could you elaborate a bit more on how David Mayfield was involved in the actual raid portion of this?
Well, it wasn't any secret that David Mayfield and I clashed because I'm one that does a lot of research, state statutes, codes, and everything else. Mayfield doesn't like that. He doesn't like to be called out on something. And so when I sent the screenshot to Brogan Jones, who is the city administrator, and Brogan sent it to David Mayfield, and Mayfield, the mayor, sent an email back to Brogan Jones and simply said, send this to all the councilors. And so my question was, why didn't they get warrants for their house? They all was in possession of the same thing I was in possession of. And Mayfield is a driving force behind this because he doesn't like me, because I have been a thorn in his side.
And how old are you and your husband?
I'm 81 and my husband is 89. old enough to know better.
So what all are you hoping will come out of this lawsuit?
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, what all are you hoping will come out of this lawsuit?
I hope that people that are responsible is held accountable and that it doesn't happen in the future. And I hope law enforcement takes notice of this case.
Have you been contacted by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation or the KBI during this whole?
Yes, I visited with John and I think Mark back in December. Very nice guys, but they didn't appear at that time that they were looking at me and Eric and the others. They were really looking into the law enforcement part of it.
Do we know where that investigation stands right now? Has the Colorado Bureau finished? Is the report done?
Well, CBI turned it over to the special prosecutors, one in Riley County and one in Sedgwick County. And I don't remember their names, I'm sorry. But when there's like 10,000 pages that they have to go through. And when they started going through it, they needed more information, so they asked the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to further their research. And as far as I know, it's still with the special prosecutors.
One thing that struck me in this case was the immense power that seems to be wielded by the mayor. The immense power that seems to be wielded by the mayor of Marion compared to other cities I've covered where the mayor is sort of a first among equals on the council. Do you think that there's some reform that's needed to the city charter to rein in a mayor who may get out of control?
Yes, well, Mayfield is one of the good old boys, and I've watched over the years. And there is a need to change the charter ordinance because right now Marion is in violation of the charter ordinances. The mayor itself should not be voting with the council. He should be set side by himself. And that's in the charter ordinances. And I've discussed this with the city attorney back in March of 2023. And all I got out of it was the mayor told me not to contact the city attorney again.
How frustrating is it? And I'm having talked to many people involved in this case, that Zach Hudlin is now in a position of power in Marion. Is that surprising to you?
It is, and I would like to go back and review the video to see if I even voted to put him in there. I probably didn't get my mouth open to say yes or no, but it is a surprise.
I think, like from a legal perspective, I'm not. I don't find it that surprising that Hudlin is still in the acting position because all of the actions he took and Gideon Cody took were all pursuant to David Mayfield's wishes and official Marion City policy. And by putting Hudlin into the position of acting police chief after these raids, the city council just showed their ratification and their support for all of the actions that he took to disregard the scope of the warrant to help get these bogus warrants in the first place. And the fact that he's now still holding that position all of these months later shows that the city does not think that he did anything wrong.
I know there's been a fight over text messages on personal cell phones involving some of these officials. Do you know where we're at with that in terms of getting that for discovery?
I was using personal email, and all of mine was released, but they wouldn't release the others.
Are you guys attempting to get a hold of that?
I know that the records lawsuit has because they made a records request to get that stuff, and so they're having a very specific fight over that. But I think we'll be able to get all of that out through discovery.
So you guys cover cases not exactly like this all the time, but what are some common themes you see and what's unique throughout the country and what was unique about the Marion raids?
I think the thing that's common is a lot of these cases do tend to happen in smaller towns, or at least in places where the people in power tend to know each other and not push back much on one another. And one person gets an idea and they all sort of go along for the ride. You saw that in this case when they refused to let Ruth get the numbers out of her cell phone. It almost seemed like they could all tell that what they were doing was wrong, but each individually didn't take the initiative and stand up and say, this is wrong, I can just open the cell phone right now and let this woman get the numbers for her medical providers out. They all just went along and fell in line, and I do think it's endemic in these places where power is consolidated in too few people and there is not enough consequences for their actions. And you see that in the fallout from this, where there were no consequences. The county sheriff's office, the city police department, the city council, no one has stepped up to punish or reprimand anyone involved for this. And it's why it keeps happening. And like you said, we do have these cases across the country. We've seen it in Texas and Florida and Iowa and Ohio and Minnesota. Or Michigan rather. It's someone speaks out and they don't. There's a power imbalance, and they use the force of law and the power of government to silence their political opponents. And I mean, I'm sure it's a tale as old as time, and it's going to keep happening until the federal courts will step up and break down these artificial barriers that they have created to accountability. And that's part of why the Institute for Justice gets involved in these cases. The federal courts have just created all of these doctrines out of whole cloth that make it harder for people like Ruth to seek accountability when the local government or the federal government or the state government violates their rights. And we hope that through this suit and all the publicity that it's getting, that we'll be able to slowly start chipping away at those barriers.
Would you just walk me through kind of the next steps in this litigation process and like your ultimate goal?
Yeah, as Ruth said, our ultimate goal is accountability. The next step will be the city and the county will have their 21 to 30 days to respond to our complaint. I know the judge who the other cases is assigned to is already working to try to get the cases consolidated. So we'll have to see what happens with that if we all get put onto one schedule. And I'm sure that the county and the government officials will claim qualified immunity or other immunity doctrines and move to dismiss on those grounds. And depending on how the court rules, those issues go up on appeal, and then the case stalls. But we are preparing for a lengthy process, and part of that is because of all of these court-made doctrines that make it harder to sue. But we're in it for the fight, and we think that at the end of the day that we will be able to hold these officials accountable, and Ruth will be able to recover for the damages that she suffered.
And I know that you said you're kind of trying to consolidate all the cases. Are you planning on seeing more people bring forward cases, or are you thinking?
I think this is everyone. I think this is probably everyone, and there's obvious factual differences between what happened to Ruth and what happened to the Record and its employees. So I don't know that the cases will get like consolidated for the whole run of things, but at least for some of this pretrial stuff and exchanging discovery, it seems like the court is interested in making things a little less complicated than having 5 different briefing schedules.
And
think
what
it's
exactly?
possible that the special prosecutors could bring criminal charges against any of these?
It is always possible. I will say in our cases we rarely see that step taken, but it is always an option available. And because that step is rarely taken, I think that is why it is so important that people like Ruth have access to a civil process to remedy the harms that have happened to them.
What would you say accountability looks like in this case? Because I mean, the people who led this whole thing. I mean, Chief Cody's gone. The mayor's not the mayor anymore. Any damages to be paid by the city?
Yes.
How did they get held accountable?
Yeah. So I think it's twofold. One, that like obviously the city and the county in all these cases often choose to pay the damages owed by individual defendants, but we have sued several of these officials in both their individual and official capacities, and like you said, they're not in office anymore, so we're basically suing the empty chair that they used to occupy and trying to get a court ruling that says that what they did violated the First Amendment, that what they did violated the Fourth Amendment. And then once you have that precedent on the book, it not just creates accountability retrospectively for those officials, but it ensures that officers going forward both know that they can't do this and that accountability will be easier the next time, because part of the barrier created by qualified immunity is there has to be prior case law on point saying that what happened is illegal. And so one thing that we try to accomplish in these cases is to create that case law, so for moving forward it's easier for other people to say that it was clearly established that what happened to them violated the Constitution. And so part of our job is just to establish that.
And so looking at the specific facts of this case, was there like one thing that really motivated you to take it, or just what's the driving force of taking it?
So Ruth's case is surprisingly similar to a case that our firm just argued at the Supreme Court this spring, back in March, where a city councilwoman in Texas tried to file a petition and got arrested for it, and they booked her and took her mugshot and put it on TV. And we also have retaliation cases in East Cleveland and in Fort Bend, Florida, or when we see cases like this where local governments are using the power of law to silence political critics, it sort of sends off our alarm bells, and we look into it, we ask questions, and we try to get involved. Often we'll do our best to represent someone in the lawsuit, and if not, we sometimes file what they call friend of the court briefs, just to make sure that, like I was saying, that we can establish that precedent to make sure that this stuff stops happening, because it really is just, it's happening all over, and it's happening in little towns that often don't get enough media attention, and so when no one sees it, no one can stop it.
Do you think that this has something to do with the political climate of recent years?
It does feel to us, and maybe it's just recency bias, but it does feel as if local officials feel as if they have permission to wield their power however they want without facing any accountability. They seem a little more brash, a little more brazen. I can't speak to what's inside their hearts and what's motivating them, but it's surprising, especially now that city council meetings are streamed online and police are wearing body cameras, that they're still just engaging in this same, like, obviously illegal conduct.
I have one more
Yeah.
from
Ruth?
Does Marion still feel like her home? Like, do you feel safe there?
Actually, I do. I have a great congregation in our church that surrounds me, and so I do feel comfortable. But I would like to say, somebody asked about personal emails a while ago. After this happened, I was told not to use my personal email. The mayor still used his personal email, and 2 of the other councilors used the personal email. The city issued me a cell phone with no service, and I was supposed to hook it up to my Wi-Fi. I turned that back in and told them that in the future they could deliver anything that I was supposed to know to the door, because I wasn't hooking the cell phone up to my Wi-Fi.
All right. Yeah, thank you all for coming out. We appreciate it.